So to say that anime is bad this season is kind of an understatement. I mean, yeah, if you're a fairy tale fan, then the season's incredible, but if you're not a fairy tale fan, then it's a bit of a struggle. Because, well, sure, of course, we have the continuation of MHA's war arc, which has been very good thus far. Outside of that, there really isn't a whole lot going on. Unless, of course, you're considering Season 2 of Tower of God. See, Tower of God is one of those anime that I just kind of missed when its first season came out. Tower of God Season 1 came out a couple of years ago while I was streaming, and people would come into my comments and be like, oh, why aren't you watching Tower of God? Oh, I hate Rachel, and so on and so forth. However, for some reason, the plot and the art style just didn't really speak to me. So Tower of God isn't something that I found myself drawn to. However, because of the insane weakness of this anime season, I figured, you know what? I'll just watch Tower of God Season 1 and see if I like it. And boy, oh boy, did I. See, while the pacing of Season 1 is a bit hectic at points because they were told they only had one season on Crunchyroll, we've now been blessed with the second season of Tower of God. And while this season doesn't come anywhere close to the first season, it's getting there. Slowly. However, Tower of God, while it may seem like a straightforward story of a boy chasing a girl up a tower, is actually one of the more complicated stories we've had in anime in a long time. See, the show revolves around an ever-changing cast of characters who fall into different castings, be they regulars, directors, rankers, or princesses of jihad. And while understanding who falls into what role is relatively simple, one thing that's not simple, especially to those who are anime only, is the power system of the universe. See, while any casual observer of Tower of God has heard them use the word shinso before, basically the only thing that an anime-only watcher knows about shinso is that it's blue or gold sometimes, and that it seems to fire out like magic. However, shinso is the lifeblood of the Tower of God universe, a substance native to all life forms in the tower that diffuses through the air like oxygen. Shinso is everything, at least in the tower. But why is shinso only in the tower? Why is it denser as you go higher in the tower? Why are some people able to control shinso directly, but others are only able to control it through weapons? And why do wave controllers need to make contracts to use shinso at a high level? Well, today we're going to be answering all those questions and more, because today we're talking Shinso Explained. And see, I personally been really enjoying Tower of God, and I hope if this video does well, I can talk more about the IP. So if you want to see more Tower of God content, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. Or if you just want to see more of my face, go ahead and follow my brand new projects that I created with Chris Barnett, Stephen He, and Danny Mata called Anime IRL, where we try to take real-life challenges to the anime world. Or if you just want to hear more of my voice, go ahead and follow my anime podcast, Otaku's Anonymous, where me and Danny Mata break down everything that happened in anime and manga this week. It's available on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. So, let's start this video off in the way that we tend to start these videos off, by answering the easy questions, like, what is Shinso? Well, one, it's pronounced Shinso, so let's get that straight. I can already hear the angry comments being deleted. Well, Shinso is something specific to the tower, as Shinso in itself exists everywhere in the tower, as it is produced by the tower. See, Shinso doesn't flow from outside the tower, and yes, there is an outside the tower. The outside is actually where Baam comes from, which makes him an irregular, somebody who's entered the tower, not somebody who was born there. And thus the idea that Shinso flows inside the tower from the outside is incorrect, because Shinso doesn't exist outside of the tower. Instead, where Shinso exists is air. Yes, you've heard me right. Inside the tower, Shinso is basically air. And thus, as the air replacement for the tower, Shinso is incredibly important to all living beings inside the tower. Meaning, much like with any magical system based in any anime, if you run out of Shinso, you die, regardless of who you are or how powerful you are. If you're out, you're gone. However, Shinso is a bit more unique than the likes of Nen or Chakra or any of those other adjacent power systems, as while Shinso is the life force of all living beings in the tower, just like how Chakra is the life force of beings in Naruto, Shinso is, like I said earlier, also a replacement for oxygen that people breathe. However, when it comes down to a power system that's comparable to how Shinso works, I would say that Shinso operates most like Nen. Now, this is mostly because, given an adequate knowledge of Shinso, one can accomplish basically anything, like eternal youth and the ability to augment how you look, like Bisky, extended lifespans, like Netero, controlling natural elements, like manipulators and transmuters, and so much more. Adequate knowledge of Shinso allows for wave controllers, or really any user of Shinso, to accomplish whatever they want, even if it's becoming a god of the universe. And also, just like with Nen, Shinso is invisible until highly concentrated, because after after all, it is an oxygen replacement. And while the majority of the time when we see Shinso concentrated to a point that it's visible, it's when a wave controller or Shinso user is firing it off at somebody else. There are places like the white steel eel's cage that Head-On uses to see if people are ready to climb the tower, where it's so concentrated that it appears as though you're swimming through it. And these kinds of places can be super dangerous, because if you don't have a high enough level of Shinsu resistance, then you'll effectively just go insane. The pressure of this much Shinsu flowing into your body will overwhelm your senses and basically destroy you from the inside out. On top of that, more often than not, in these highly concentrated areas of Shinso, there's divine sea fish, like the white steel eel, and they're some of the strongest creatures in the entirety of the tower, so if the Shinso doesn't get you, they will. But now that we got the basics cleared up, let's head back to the beginning. How was Shinso discovered? How do we know all of this? And what do we really know specifically about Shinso that makes it one of the more fleshed out power systems in anime and, well, I guess, manhwa? Well, a lot of the reason that we know so much about Shinso and a lot of the information and exposition we get from the manhwa comes from somebody by the name of Po Badao Gustang, the first ever person to study Shinso. And Gustang is the head of the Po Badao family, who are one of the 10 great families. And thus, basically, any units or jargon that I'm going to be using come from his research. However, he's not the only person in the Tower of God universe that does research on Shinso. As a Shoal Edwaru, who writes a book based in the Tower of God universe called Of the Tower's Weapons, interviews a series of irregulars in order to see the differences between air and Shinso. And basically what he's able to deduce is that there are a couple of key differences between air and Shinso. And that is mostly that Shinso doesn't operate under the same physical properties as air. As while the physical laws of air are unanimous, regardless of where air is, Shinso does not conform to the same physical standards, as Shinso can form and flow differently in different areas, with it sometimes being a gas, sometimes being a liquid, sometimes being dense, and sometimes being light. And all of these things are at the whim of the floor's environment, what director is in charge of the floor. And the flow of Shinso on a certain floor determines its properties, as to whether or not it'll have the properties of fire, water, or light. However, it's the lack of conformity in Shinso that allows it to be the lifeblood of the entire tower. It can effectively fill the role of any kind of natural element or energy, especially if it's being manipulated. See, like I've already stated, Shinso can exist in 3 main elemental forms: light, water, and fire. Technically, Shinso can exist as any phenomenon outside of these 3, but these 3 are the most common. And thus, usually, before somebody becomes a wave controller or a Shinso manipulator, they need to identify their own Shinso qualities. Shinso qualities are a bit like an elemental affiliation. You know how in Hunter x Hunter, you do a Nen test to see if you're a manipulator, or transmuter, or a specialist, and how in Naruto, people are born with specific elemental affinities? That's basically what we're talking about with Shinso. And thus, prior to becoming a Shinso manipulator, you need to identify what your Shinso quality is. That being said, though, very few people are able to add a quality to their Shinso, and thus the majority of wave controllers or Shinso manipulators that you see are just firing condensed Shinso. However, those who are able to identify Shinso qualities and apply those qualities to their Shinso are able to add elemental releases of sorts to their Shinso releases. And thus, if somebody is hypothetically able to turn their Shinso into electricity or ice, they are considered not only rare, but also much more powerful than your standard wave controller. But even before you want to try and manipulate Shinso and even possibly apply a quality to it, if you're trying to use Shinso without the usage of a special item that allows for the channeling of Shinso, you need to obtain a contract or permission from the administrator of your floor. Now, administrators of each floor on the tower are dark, mysterious beings that are overflowing with Shinso, and their entire purpose is to test the people on their floor to see if they can pass to the next floor. Now, don't confuse administrators with examiners. Examiners are people like Lee Roro. Examiners conduct the tests on the behalf of the administrators who run the floor. Those administrators are people like Head-On, and thus by making a contract with the entity that controls all Shinso on that floor, you are therefore allowed to use Shinso on that floor. But does this mean you have to make a contract with the administrator of all the floors you want to use Shinso on? Yeah, it does, actually. And technically, this rule also applies to items that allow you to channel Shinso through them. Therefore, if an item that you have allows you to channel Shinso through the 10th through 20th floors, you can't use it on the 9th floor, and you can't use it on the 21st floor. Because every floor of the tower is basically an entirely separate entity, an entirely separate country-sized platform where the Shinso is differently controlled by different administrators. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that you need to have a contract with an administrator to use Shinso, as obviously baam in the Crown game uses Shinso without an existing contract. However, this is because baam is an irregular. He's not from the tower, and therefore the rules of the tower don't technically apply to him. On top of this, you are able to use some basic applications of Shinso without a contract with the administrator. Be those minor Shinso blasts or strengthening your body against dense Shinso, all those things can happen without a contract. But we've been dancing around this idea of there being two separate ways to control Shinso for a while, and that's because there is two separate ways to control Shinso. Either direct control or through items. Now, usually when I say direct control of Shinso, a lot of your brains are going to go to wave controllers and their ability to fire out Shinso blasts. However, wave controllers are a highly specified group of people amongst the regulars. And while they are specialized in the direct control of Shinso, all regulars need to learn how to control Shinso in order to climb up the tower and become rankers one day. Because without the direct control of Shinso, one cannot enhance their own physical abilities or strengthen their body. But not all regulars have the ability to precisely control Shinso. So some people like Rosiel or Lurker use Shinso items to channel Shinso through. And channeling your Shinso through an item has the added benefit of not requiring an additional contract because the usage of Shinso through this item was already approved in a place known as the workshop prior to its use.
But Nick, what's the workshop?
For both of our sanities, let's just say it's the place where magical items get created. It's not that I don't understand what the workshop is, it's that if I go to explain to you how the workshop works, we're gonna need an entire another video. It's where humans go to try to recreate the feats of gods. So now that we understand how Shinso is used, let's talk about in what capacity it's used, or in what capacity it exists. Shinso exists in 4 categories. Pure Shinso, which is the kind of Shinso that baam uses, which appears in the form of a liquid, which is said to be the purest form of Shinso and therefore the most powerful. Man-controlled Shinso, which is the kind of Shinso you see basically everybody outside of baam using. And while there is a differentiation between man-controlled Shinso and pure Shinso, we don't actually know what that differentiation is. Then there's also Shinso organs, which are organs that people augment in their own bodies to change the direction or quality of their Shinso. And then, last but not least, there's ignition weapon Shinso. Now, ignition weapons are very rare, very powerful weapons in the tower. And the reason ignition weapons are so powerful is because they're imbued with a soul. Yes, these right, these weapons are enhanced with refined Shinso and given a soul. And thus, when Shinso is funneled into these weapons, the souls awaken and the weapon becomes vastly more powerful. So Shinso can get a bit complicated, especially when you start to consider the terms and conditions that one has to sign when they make a contract with the administrator of a certain floor. See, because after all, the usage of Shinso coming from a contract is rather appropriate, because you are serving some terms and conditions with the floor's administrators to be able to use their power. And if you ever break any of these terms or conditions, your usage of Shinso is stripped from you. And to make it even worse and even more complicated, the terms and condition apply differently to different people. Usually those who are weaker Shinso manipulators have more terms and conditions. However, in the contracts that rankers and high rankers make with administrators, they're basically free of all restrictions, something that only happens for regular people on the 43rd floor. See, because the 43rd floor is the only floor in the entirety of the tower where Shinso can be used freely without a contract, for reasons I won't spoil right now. A rule that also technically applies to all irregulars on all floors. But irregulars aren't the only people who don't have to technically make a contract to control Shinso, as also the members of the 10 great families have a fairly high chance at falling into a situation such as this as well, as many members of the 10 great families are born with the ability to manipulate Shinso. But why? Well, because members of the 10 great families have a high chance of being born with an existing contract with an administrator. That is to say that because they're born into the 10 great families, they are born with an existing contract with the administrator of the floor they're born onto, and thus are just born with the ability to manipulate Shinso. But this doesn't mean that members of the 10 great families can't go out and make additional contracts with administrators, and in fact, they do usually do that because it makes their Shinso control stronger. But since we're talking about the strength of Shinso, we should talk about how the strength of Shinso is measured. That is to say, now that we've described what Shinso is, how it's used, and how it's acquired, we should talk about the qualitative aspect of the informational video we're currently making. And if you want to talk about the qualitative side of Shinso, you need to know 3 words: bang, myeon, and so. These 3 words were created by the Po guy we talked about earlier and allow for the quantification of how powerful somebody's Shinso is. But what do these 3 terms mean, and how do they play into deciding how powerful somebody's Shinso is? Let's get into it. See, like we already said, Shinso can exist in basically any form. It represents all natural phenomena and energies. However, for the sake of the analogies I'm going to be doing here, let's think of Shinso as water. Basic unit of Shinso manipulation is bang, so that'd kind of be like your milliliters or your liters if you're talking about water. The size of the bang in question, which would be your centimeters, your radius, your diameter, is referred to as myeon, and the density of your Shinso is referred to as your so. So your so decides whether or not your water is steam, water, or ice. Your myeon decides how big your Shinso is, and your bang decides how many milliliters or liters of Shinso are in this equation. So bang is volume, myeon is size, and so is density. And thus how skilled somebody is in their usage of Shinso is boiled down to these 3 major components. And while I know I said bang refers to the volume of a Shinso being manipulated, it's often referred to in the manhwa and the anime as how many Shinso projectiles can you use simultaneously. That is to say, if you're able to generate 1 orb of Shinso, that's 1 bang. However, if you're able to generate 5 orbs of Shinso, that would be 5 bangs. And thus, the more bangs that somebody's able to create and manipulate, the more skilled they are as a Shinso manipulator. However, being able to control multiple bangs simultaneously does not mean that you'll be able to increase your myeon and your so of those bangs. Because like we said, skill in Shinso falls into these 3 categories. So being able to increase the amount of bangs you can create doesn't mean you can make them denser or larger. On top of this, trying to create as many bangs as possible is highly dangerous, as not only is it incredibly mentally and physically taxing, but if you overdo it and run out of Shinso, you can die. Now, myeon is a bit more complicated. See, myeon refers to the size of a bang. Yes, but more specifically, myeon describes the surface area that a bang takes up, regardless of height. See, that's to say that the only thing taken into consideration when calculating myeon is how far stretched the bang is in a horizontal direction. However, myeon is probably the most important aspect when discerning how powerful a Shinso user is, as the entire purpose of manipulating Shinso, at least when it was applied to the idea of traditional wave controllers, was being able to cover an entire battlefield in your Shinso. As a traditional wave controller, much prior to the storyline of the Tower of God, was said to be able to control the Shinso on an entire battlefield, and hence why they were called the wave controller. And thus those who are able to stretch out their bangs to massive distances are some of the strongest users of Shinso in the entire universe. However, just because you're able to stretch out your Shinso across a massive distance doesn't mean that you can control the density, at least that precisely, because most wave controllers, when they stretch out the myeon as far as they can, have a particularly high density of Shinso in the middle of their myeon, and the outsides are a lot thinner. However, that of course is where so comes into play. But the calculation of so is a bit weird. See, so's numerical value is only dictated from the densest part of Shinso in a myeon. That is to say that if you had a myeon that was a mile wide, however, the center of it had the densest amount of Shinso and was therefore the strongest, that only that center would be used to numerically dictate how powerful this myeon is. And obviously the density of Shinso at a myeon is dependent on the user and the situation they're in. However, there is an upper limit to how much Shinso can be packed in a certain myeon, but those rules are hazy at best. And thus the way that a Shinso manipulator is evaluated in terms of how powerful they are is based on how many bangs they can create regardless of density or size, the biggest myeon they can make one of, or how much so they can gather into 1 myeon. And thus if hypothetically you were able to create 3 bangs at once, even though they were only the size of a golf ball and had the density of air, but you were able to control a 50 myeon, that is to say it had the diameter of 50, or you were able to gather 40 so into 1 bang, those would be your numbers as a Shinso manipulator. And thus obviously the higher number you get in any of those categories, the stronger you are. And with that, that's basically everything you need to know about Shinso. I mean, yeah, we could get deeper into lighthouses and the workshop and ignition weapons, and we could get a lot deeper into administrators and how the floors are laid out, but I believe that's the totality of the information that you need to know in order to head into Season 2 of Tower of God with the highest level of understanding possible to make sure you're enjoying it as much as possible. But I'm curious to hear from you guys. Do you want to hear me keep talking about Tower of God? And if you do, what topics do you want to hear me cover? Tell me in the comments below, and while you guys are down there, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell, because trust me, there's a lot to talk about.